Maybe I always like sort of a centering.
Hmm.
They've had a really busy day, and it's already smack down in the middle of their day or towards the end of their day, and you and I are just beginning our day. So we might still be in the zone of waking up, and they are dialing down. So I'd like us to just take a moment and just center a little bit while I read something about preparing for peace. Another book by John Paul Lederach.
Absolutely.
Yes, I am always amazed at reading his work and just seeing how he puts most of his work in context because it's not just theoretical, but really practical. He says, over the past years, the idea of conflict transformation has emerged in search for adequate language to describe peacemaking ventures. Transformation provides a more holistic understanding, which can be fleshed out at several levels. And unlike resolution and management, transformation simply eliminates or control the conflict, but points towards a dialectic nature of social conflict in human creation. So the sum of what he's saying here is transformation helps us to look beyond the conflict. It helps us to think creatively outside of the context of the we find ourselves. So as we come this afternoon, I hope that as we continue to learn from each other, that we will think about our work as transformational. It's not static, it's not one size fits all, but it continues to evolve as nonviolent community organizers. Thank you.
I have one little anecdote to follow up Samuel's centering, which is last night I was putting my son to bed, who some of you saw a picture I just put on the screen. He's 3, and he wanted to play a little bit more before he put on his pajamas, of course. And so we were playing and very vigorously rolling around on the bed and everything. And he stopped and he said, "Daddy, now if we get mad at each other, we can check in, right?" And I said, "Yeah, that's right, Daniel." So, and it made me think about the training that we've been doing. Right now, I make the connection to Samuel's point about transforming the context, that even when we're mad at each other, whoever it is that we're mad at, we can make the choice to stop and check in. And I was making the connection back to our work on the levels of conflict yesterday. A certain level of conflict is normal, and that's when we do prevention by saying, "Hey, are your feelings hurt right now?" Or "How are you doing? How can we stay in good relationship with each other?" So what I'd like to ask you to do is to turn to someone next to you. I realize we're running out of people because so many people, but still, I think there are 3 pairs or something like that. And share something about, share together how you have been personally integrating or reflecting on the material from yesterday. Just as you make connections to your personal life and to your community peace and reconciliation work, share together for a few minutes about how it's going with integrating this material, just what's happening inside of you as a part of this training. So go ahead. You'll have about 5 minutes total, or a little bit longer, which means each person gets 2 or 3 minutes, and I'll let you know when it's halfway through. So that should be about half of your time. Very efficient, eh? Has everyone concluded?
Very strong. Yeah, we're done.
I can't see. Are the others still talking?
They are still talking, yeah.
Training, which is about decent reconciliation training. So it's a very strong
You've been unmuted.
So I'd like to hear some of the.
We would too.
Oh, I don't.
Come on, everybody. Keep.
Now Samuel's walked away, so we'll get this training moving for the day. Oh, you're muted, my friend.
I was just behind the screen trying to start up my third computer screen so I can see some of the things that
All right.
You only see the things we want you to see, Samuel.
Yeah, that's right. So we'd like to hear some of what you are sharing with each other. What are the ways that you're integrating this or chewing over the material since yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, this is Mike speaking here, this is me. We've had a meeting of the steering group of the Peace and Reconciliation Centre, and we were looking at, I've kind of got a conceptual grid now of, we've got different ministries where one is helping individuals, will be helping individuals be peaceable people, some which is helping organisations in conflict, and then this NBC approach, and then we have work with extremists. And for me, it's kind of, I can see the way I've moved between, I've focused in two areas and some of the guides and some of the other ones. So for me, it's been much more, I've done quite a lot of conflict training. And so this is interesting. It's being able to integrate it as the whole centre, as where does the NB approach fit? And it's a slightly different ministry to what I do. And it's given me kind of a grid, which is really helpful, and say actually it requires different levels of courage, different levels of commitment in the different spheres. So that's me. Very helpful.
Thanks, Mike. Someone else?
Well, I shared that I was dealing with something that was in my mind, as you all shared yesterday, that it really helped to have in the backdrop of what I was, in a conflict I'm thinking through, the issues that you were bringing to the table, just to kind of hold myself accountable to what we were talking about. And I just thought it was really good timing and just talking that through.
I think for me, Sander here. Hi, there's my hand. I think there are always two things really, which were one, obviously, as a Christian and as a minister, I needed to sort of really, to my mind, reconcile the theological basis of this. So I found yesterday very helpful to just help me to make the links to join the dots. That was really, really helpful. And the other thing is just that, I've always given a lot of thought as to, this postmodern generation, are turned off all sorts of institutions, church being one of them. And one of the reasons for that is there's this incredible sense of disempowerment that a lot of them have, and this disillusionment and stuff. And so the whole thing of actually showing people how they can make a material difference in what they do in more than just a token way, I think was a great eye-opener. It was like a light bulb moment for me as well. So there's a couple of things there for me I really sort of benefited from on reflection yesterday, I think.
Thanks. That's exciting to hear. That's exciting to hear.
It's worth saying, Andy hasn't said this, but prior to his coming here, and he's just been ordained within the Anglican Church, but he was part of a church planting team of a group called Soul Survivor, which over the last 20 years or so has probably been one of the most impacting groups working with the sort of 20th generation in the nation. And was part of that group. So actually what he's saying there is, he's heard the voice of that generation, and we have the opportunity to bring I think as we process this,
Yeah.
in some of that context
Yeah.
over the coming years,
Definitely. Yeah.
which will be very much our hope.
Mm.
So what he's saying is actually quite significant, I think, as we process what this looks like.
Yeah. Can I just make one little carousel on that? Was just so I was saying to Pete this morning in the office was that we've often stressed the need for people in this generation to go and to be the difference, and often it's been expressed in they'll go on some sort of overseas mission, sort of aid stuff, or it's that sort of hit and miss, random act of kindness type of approach. And I think what I'm excited about here is to hear, well, actually here's some tools for you to make an ongoing, sustainable difference over the years where you are, and that's, I think, is something I'm really looking forward to hearing from. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm really excited, and thanks for the additional context, Peter. It makes me think I've been supporting a group of congregations here in Portland that are organizing around climate issues. And in one of our meetings, I was presenting some nonviolence material, different than what we're doing here, but related. And one of the women, there were 40 people there, and one of the women in the group said, as I was presenting the material, she said, I feel hope for the first time in 2 years. And so I think that what you're saying, as people encounter this material who want to know how to make the world a better place and see how broken it is, even in the midst of the world's blessedness, its brokenness, there are people who want to make a difference, and there are some concrete things that we can offer. So I'm really glad to hear that. Does anyone else have a reflection?
I mean, I think for me it raised lots of questions again, which I'm starting to think through and write down. But some of it is around material that I've done a lot of work with, like consensus leadership and building consensus-led teams and communities. How some of this will really enrich that. A lot of it is very similar, but this will kind of add another dimension to it. So I'm just trying to really reflect on that this morning when I was sitting at my desk. Well, how does that fit in? And digging some of that material out and looking at it again as well. So it's really interesting.
Great. Hi, Nanzip. I heard you were late, but I didn't know you snuck in.
Just got in. He's like a ninja. See you.
Is it still caught up in the African time, or is he?
So the other question that we wanted to ask is, one of your assignments last night was to share something about this training with someone outside the training. And I want to ask how that went and what conversation you had.
Well, my dog Abel this morning was very... I'll be honest, that's the only person I've seen outside the train. But he was very interested.
Yeah, probably had very, very loving eyes, lots of tail wags, I'm sure.
I shared it with I've been doing my chaplaincy role today, and I shared it with a lady I had an appointment with at Costa's. We had about an hour together, and she was asking me how I was and what was I doing and what new stuff I've been involved in. So I was telling her, I think this might be my only opportunity to getting out of my pajamas and to talk to someone else. And it was interesting because I felt what I was just sharing with Mike was how widely you can apply the principles that you've been talking about. And she kind of introduced even more ideas into that. And she's also studying, and we were trying to find some sort of common ground in terms of some of the theories. She's studying to be a teacher. some of the theories where we can find some common ground. But mainly we were talking about her, obviously. So it was very brief, but I did do it.
Yeah.
I had coffee with a friend this morning, and she's a long-term friend, and we've talked about these issues quite a bit. She's a mother of a 1-year-old, so it was a time to be out of the house with the 1-year-old and also thinking about life. But one of her comments is I talked about just how the way you define nonviolence has really helped me put the pacifism in this in correct categories.
Yeah.
And it was the same way for Sharon. She immediately said, oh, well, those are the exact points I've always struggled. And because it just seemed like you had the two choices, violence or pacifism. So we had a really good discussion around different conflicts we've been involved in and how that understanding would give a lot more security as you're walking it through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Samuel, I'm curious if you have any reflections as you're listening.
Just trying to synthesize all that I'm hearing. I appreciate Andy's sharing about having to use this to see how it can be a generational gap, bridge the generational gap, and how we can get it to the next generation to understand and see this concept. And then lastly, what Kathy just said, like really, I put it down. I kind of took note immediately when she said the definition of how we help how understand nonviolence. You know, the non-violence and nonviolence, it's one concept that I think we need to spend more time talking about, because not in this session, but it's always struck me that every time we have this presentation, I realize that people, it's like a light bulb moment.
Oh, it was, yeah.
Yeah.
It's so, I think it helps people be able to put a handle, to be able to have a grip of, okay, now I can differentiate between pacifism and nonviolence.
Yeah.
So all of this sharing, and hopefully Ian will be able to see how this material can be useful as part of a tool on his tool belt with all his work of reconciliation. Yeah, so I think this is great stuff that I'm hearing. Yeah.
I'm sure that's part of dog training as well.
Nanzip, do you have any comments? Either what people were talking about before you came in is how they're integrating the material overnight, or then we're just now sharing about how we shared it with other people. Do you have any comments to bring?
I shared it with my wife, and it's quite a new idea, but just it kind of opened up a very huge discussion, like what do I want to do in my life?
That's why he was late.
Share what we came up with. Definitely, that shows some inspiration from just the one-day talk, and having to take it back home and share it with someone else, and bringing kind of raising questions on the big picture of where the world is at and how can I contribute to make it a better place. So it's good.
Yeah.
That was a bold
It's one of the things that has been my observation over time, that this material, teaching this material, we're not just technicians of social change, but we're philosophers and theologians. And so I don't mean just Samuel and I, but all of us, as we engage this material, it goes to the heart of what we do. And like I said at the beginning, it's a universalized approach that's based on agape Christian love. And so it raises significant questions. And so I appreciate what you're saying, and I don't take it lightly. Thank you.
we okay if we open the doors?
It's just the noise traffic goes through to the office. Well, once Becky's gone, we'll open. We are quite loud.
The windows open.
The windows are as open as they can be.
Excuse me.
Are there any other comments?
I think for myself, just picking up what she said there in terms of the universalizing of the concept, I was reflecting and saying to Andy just now as we were sharing, this being my second training, obviously it sits into a different context in the stage of my life and my work. And things have developed significantly since 2 years ago when I took the training in Rhode Island. I think also one of the things that does, I mean, it's the same curriculum, but with different trainers, it highlights, it underlines different pieces.
Yeah.
I think hearing David yesterday, who, you know, and comparing what he brought with what Dr. Bernard Lafayette shared. I mean, obviously their experiences had many points of commonality, but having come from different contexts, they bring their own story context into that journey and the product. And I think hearing those two different contexts, one very much from within the church of the black church of the South, the other from a very different context, but drawing on the peace traditions of one of the historical peace denominations. You know, very significantly different pieces coming into the mix. And actually that broadens it. And for me, as I'm sitting listening, it's, as you hear it from a different perspective, it does provide more of a universal rather than specific even itself. So that's been very interesting and helpful for me on my second take.
Yeah, wonderful.
But obviously very similar foundational material. But certainly hearing David yesterday was very inspiring in terms of his, you know, the social impact, the impact on democracy. I mean, I think you drew out at the time, the democracy is going through an incredibly challenging time just now.
Yes.
And I think it can only get worse based upon where our society is. And this is a very restorative piece in that whole mix. If only we can find a way of getting it back at a level that actually will impact significant numbers.
That's true. Yeah. I think that's one of the questions I've written down is I'm chair of the board of governors at a local school, and after listening to David yesterday, I'm glad we kind of recorded it because I'd like to listen to it again.
I hope we record.
Because it just, how do we get that into our schools? You know, how do we get an understanding of what democracy really is? And it's not about institutions. It's not about the political class. It's that democracy is about us and our responsibility. We elect these people. We can change their minds. I just think that for me was a really interesting. So I've got a lot of questions around that. I made a whole load of questions this morning around how can we kind of try and implement that and how this impacts that. I think the other thing that it was how this impacts our understanding of the gospel.
Yeah.
You know, so really, I mean, coming from a very charismatic, evangelical, reformed background, you know, it's this isn't in the gospel, but actually, it's at the very heart of the gospel. You know, and I just think that's a whole other bit of work to do. But again, if we're going to engage the next generation, we have to put this in the gospel. It has to be an important part of it.
And that was where I was coming from. So what I was thinking a bit about this is that, as Christian ministers, this is our part of this is for us to say, and this is why you should care about it.
Yeah.
This isn't just a political perspective that somehow sits outside of church. This is in the gospel. You know, as you say, this is part of it. This is part of the bringing of the kingdom of God. And it's absolutely, yeah.
This is so exciting.
Yeah.
I feel thrilled by the different responses and connections and applications that you're seeing. I have a couple of just quick comments. Peter, it was interesting to hear you reflecting on the difference between hearing some of the material or different material from David than Doc, and some of the history of how the curriculum came to be written is that after Dr. King's assassination, David and Doc, who had been working in Chicago together, went their own ways. And they were doing leadership development based on their experiences in the movement, but in different contexts. And after some time, I mean, they were still in touch, but they hadn't written a curriculum. And after some time, they came together and said, well, let's see what the overlap is. And so they started talking about how they were teaching people about what their experiences had been in the movement. And I think that they actually just decided, well, let's do a training together. And they recorded it and then used that as the basis for the curriculum. But they each brought their own gifts and personality and different style of charisma to that. And so, like, I think it's really exciting when someone who has primarily experienced Doc can experience David and vice versa, because they both hold a piece. Like, my experience has been that Doc holds a very relational, story, anecdotal piece that's an important part, and David holds some of the theory. Not that Doc's isn't based in theory, but David can just say, here's the 7 parts of the democratic way of life, bom, 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 bom. And that's the way he operates. And so I know that David would be thrilled, Ian, by what you're saying about bringing some of this material into a school context. In some of the advanced training programs, so what you're experiencing today and yesterday is really like in between a briefing and a 2-day core in Kingian nonviolence. And then over the last several years, we've been developing advanced training programs, in which right now we have a cohort that's called Beyond the Dream, the Radical Love of Martin Luther King Jr. And so we have 14 people in a cohort, a 6-month cohort right now, that are reading all of Dr. King's readings, along with writings by women leaders in the movement. And in one of those advanced programs, we read some of the actual writing. He mentioned a man named Richard Hauser, who they used some of his theories to codify what they'd seen Dr. King doing. And he has 2 like extremely long manuscripts that were not published that we read in one of those advanced seminars. And so there's a lot of stuff that's out there. It's not necessarily in published form, but David and some of us have been working at figuring out how to bring some of that material to make it relevant and current today. So, wow. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, well, here's what's coming up today. So yesterday, let me get back to my correct screen. I got too many screens happening here. Yesterday, we introduced some core concepts like nonviolence versus non-violence, types and levels of conflict, and introduced the principles. And then closed telling stories of courage about in our lives. Today, what we'd like to do is go back through the principles. And this is after you, or some significant subset of you, I hope, has had a chance to look at the Pilgrimage to Nonviolence. And we have a different set of slides today, which has the Jensen and Lafayette definition on one side and the most relevant paragraph from King on the other side. And what we'd like to do is just walk back through and talk together about how you're continuing to grapple with the ramifications of the principles, and also what it does to put it together with the MLK text directly. And so the format for this will be, we'll go to principle 1, and I'll put the slide up. And at the beginning of it, before we go to the text, I'm going to ask someone there in the room to stand up and give your potted version of that principle. And so that's to say, when you're done with this training, when we're done today, we would love for you to have to be able to say what principle 3 is about or what principle 4 is about. And so, and in your own language. You don't have to say it in the language of the curriculum or Dr. King. So we're going to put you on the spot and ask you, someone, a volunteer for each principle, to stand up and say, here's this principle, here's what this is about for me. There's not a right answer. We're all always learning to articulate the philosophy and the theology of nonviolence. And so this is a practice activity. So, are you ready to go?
Ready.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen. There it is, from Cranston. Okay. Who is ready to stand up and tell us what principle 1 is all about? Oh, for my reference, at this point on the screen, do you only see the slide, or do you still see Samuel and I and the group photo as well?
Yeah.
We can get a little strip along the bottom with both of you in it.
Okay, so you can still see us a little bit. Okay, good.
I can choose to bring you up if I want to.
Okay, good. I was just curious because we're going to be working with this material for a while, and I wanted us to be at least visually represented, so you're not just looking at a slide.
No, we can see you.
We'll try and wear some silly hats and stuff like that to keep you interested. I don't have any silly hats. I'm sorry. So who's gonna stand up and give us your principle 1 in your own words? Oh, and the standing up part is important because that's the part where we're standing up in front of our congregation on Sunday morning, or we're standing up in front of a community meeting, or we're dropping a little bit of philosophy into public government meeting, or so we're just getting it in our hearts and bones and minds and spirits. So.
Yeah, okay, great. That's Mike.
Where are you?
I'll come right now. You don't. I'll move around. So this is a really personal one. So it's slightly different. So for me, explaining to my family, in contrast to mediating and transforming conflict that I can do from outside, a non-violent approach takes me to be involved in a daily part of working for others in a disadvantageous situation.
Thank you. So everybody's going to get a chance to do that. So let's give Mike a round of applause, or shake it out. And what we'd like to do now is talk about Principle 1 a little bit. You've got the King text in front of you now, and you may have it in the paper form also, and the Jensen and Lafayette definition And I'd like to hear a little bit more about what Principle One means to you, or what's unique about this and the philosophy, or just how you're continuing to wrestle with this one. And if people have comments from the pilgrimage to nonviolence, just bring them in.
When I was reading the pilgrimage essay, the thing that struck me most was Gandhi's comment about, if there must be blood, then let it be ours. Something like that. That's not a direct quote. And just thinking that when we're talking about courage, how far that courage, how willing are we to take the courage as far as it can go? What's in us? What's our own level of courage in terms of bringing about non-violence?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I really love this for the word courage and courageous people. And then the way he says it, it's not just outward, but inward. And I think that element of recognizing each one of us has a capacity to do the things that are courageous. And I just think that then speaks of Jesus and the ways in which he was inspired to be that force. And I think having been in and out of Israel and Palestine quite a few times with teams, and often the moments that impact all of us are just accidental things in which somebody says the right thing at the right moment. And I thought courage actually is the word for that. It's just being present.
Being present and being willing to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think of the scripture, don't worry what you will say when you're hauled up before the courts, but because the Spirit will give you the words. And so it's a matter, the courage is not necessarily only personal courage, but it's a spiritual stance of openness.
Yeah. And they just happen accidentally most of the time for me anyway. It just suddenly there's a moment that's open.
So I'd like to make two lists on the wall behind me, or maybe, no, let's do it that way. I'm going to stop share for just a second so we get bigger. Okay, so, and the two lists are, what are the kinds of courage that you've already had to have in Luton to get as far as you've gotten? And what do you need to be courageous about yet in the future? What is the courage that will be demanded from you? And we don't have to do one list then the other. We can just do. I guess it's future or present.
I was thinking of the first time that Peter said to me something, probably 2009 or 2010, about coming down to a demonstration. And
I invite all my friends to
That's
do it.
right.
And all of you are my best friends.
and it wasn't Nancy, but it was a couple of other Nigerians with me, and he asked us to come in. First thought was physically be safe, and and having to kind of wrestle that not only for myself, but also being responsible for these two, and then talking it through with them. And then just says, we are safe.
Uh-huh. Going out to demonstration.
But there were two different sides that are a little rough.
I think to this day, to this time, it's a degree of courage, but we've been well received by the majority of the community. It's taken a degree of courage to be bold in challenging policing methods at times. It's taking courage to be bold in asking the city council for us to be involved, be bold in working closely with the Muslim community, but it has always been well received. The challenge has been in the face of the sort of violent far right side of things. And generally speaking, that's been relatively controlled. I think I anticipate with the changing social situation, a time where actually we are increasingly going to be challenging policing and government policy. And I think that will require a very different type of boldness, because up until now, we have had a strong support from the police. But actually, I think as governments become more radical and extreme in their policies, actually they're not going to make it so easy. And so I anticipate, even now with our extremism legislation, we are more actively having to challenge the police and the city and the national policy, because it is unjust and wrong. And there's some things there that I think will not make it so easy in the future.
So you were previously challenging the police, but
it's been detail at times. For example, I mean, there was one occasion when at 6 planning meetings in a row, I for a demonstration. They rated me, but you could see that on me. And only after on the 6th day, on the 6 weeks in a row, we were planning. The lead area was about 10 weeks. And it was only after 6 meetings that they said, we've decided to change our mind, and we think what Peter's been saying is right. But that took 6 meetings, and I mean, to be honest, I was only at that meeting by their invitation. They could have excluded me from the meeting in order to just make life easier. But it was, and they changed it. It was 2 years later, they said, Peter, we followed your inclination at that point. Because if we'd gone with that plan, things would have been so much worse. And so there has been a degree of having to challenge the police, but I think generally speaking, it's been with a willingness to do it. We're not asking them to go against the government, but I think that increasingly the policing regime is going to be more challenging.
Yes. Does anyone else have something to contribute about courage in the past or courage in the present and future?
Yeah, I would just say that I think that for all of us, what courage means, many of us have gone on a journey of courage because we're stepping out of our comfort zones. So I think there was a time when I've never chaired anything, and we met the leaders of Britain First. And it was like, Mike, you're going to chair this meeting with the leaders of Britain First on one side and the Christian activists on the other. And you're just knowing that these are recording everything, and they're gonna stick it on YouTube straight after. And actually, you're kind of going, well, what am I doing? Because Peter doesn't say it, but our phone lines are marked. So if we do a 999 call, the police come straight around, because because, you know, there are, but it was a kind of stepping, for me, there's a kind of, many of us, we're kind of stepping out from behind the wall, the safety of the middle class white community, to actually standing on the wall and going, actually, we need to engage. And I don't think it's a particular, so that's the Britain first, so engaging with Britain first is the pastor. So I think it's, so that for me is courage, although for other people that would be nothing at all. I mean, because as a clergyman, you know, you walk into these things and it's a really interesting mix because they're and so it's quite, that was all Peter. Probably, yeah.
My friends do it.
What were you going to say?
I think for me, it would be of knowing what you stand for, you know, not being shaken, you know, by your surrounding, you know. I remember once, you know, during one of the demonstrations, I have the fear of, you know, one, I'm black, I'm from Nigeria, I'm all of that, you know, and I'm wearing a chaplain's vest and, you know, standing, you know, kind of in the midst of the EDL demonstration, and, you know, I perceive them as racist, you know, so anything could happen to me, but, you know, knowing that, okay, I'm standing for the truth, you know, and it doesn't matter what happened here, but I'm representing something that is greater than the cause that they were fighting for, you know, kind of gave me that courage to even go in their midst and, you know, have a conversation, you know, with them, you know. So it's kind of like that thing, I think even going back to reading the material that was sent, you know, you're not seeking to humiliate or shame, you know, the opposition, you know, when you're doing a non-violent act. So it's kind of like you're going with good rather than to kind of embarrass them or, you know, shame them or humiliate them or what they're doing and things. So,
Wonderful. You've provided us with a great segue to Principle 2. Since you quoted Dr. King, we'll go there. In a way, Non-Zip just took the challenge to articulate Principle 2 in your own voice, but would you like to say some more about Principle 2? Since you didn't know you were doing it yet?
I didn't know it was there.
You just did it. Yeah.
Either Non-Zip or someone else stand up and give us Principle 2 as if you were saying it to the chief of police or as if you were saying it from the pulpit on Sunday morning, or in your own words.
I don't think I can do any better than the words of Dr. King. It doesn't seek to defeat or humiliate the opponent, but to win their friendship and understanding. I mean, that actually sums up totally our own experience in not alienating, but in reaching out. And it is, I mean, his word there, the end is redemption and reconciliation. I mean, the traditional model of opposition to protest, and particularly right-wing protest, is the anti-fascist movement, which is worse than the guys they're opposing, and it is based upon the language of violence, and so Principle 5 is so important there as well, about internalizing non-violence.
Can I give a statement for just the principle itself? I'll stand up and say.
Yeah, but
Good, do it.
Oh, excuse me, Joe.
no, I'm sorry, I was just finishing.
Because I was thinking about preaching it on Sunday, and I would want to say it in "Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done," and go on there.
The aftermath of violence is tragic bitterness. There's such a good statement there.
I was just going to read that sentence. Yeah, that sentence captures so much.
You know, I mean, I think what I was saying, there was one of the things that we realized, and I mentioned this a little bit yesterday, we realized that some of these people who were demonstrating on the far right were actually the sons and daughters and the family members of church members around the town. And there was no way you could use the language of hatred and smashing them towards those people. You had to use the language, well, you had to use pastoral language. And so we adopted what I often sum up as a pastoral approach to dealing with demonstrations and dealing with the far right. And the pastoral approach is essentially the language of redemption. It seeks to draw, it seeks to build the lost community.
I'm just reminded that you know, everyone is made in the image of God.
Mm-hmm.
So that's everyone, isn't it? That's everyone.
What are the practical challenges with this one?
Well, one of the practical things is we just, with the court issues with Britain First, I had an opportunity a couple weeks ago with Michael Campbell, who's the head of the chaplaincy, and we started a conversation, which is what we've been aiming at, just waiting in the waiting room with the leader. And the gentleman, the whole time I was thinking, I'm really struggling listening to his story and his kind of bragging about what they stand for. But then I kept, when he talked about his faith, it suddenly was like, just this real heartfelt thing of, this man really has had an experience of God. And I need to see that to undemonize him in my own head, because he represents everything that makes me go, ugh. And it really helped, because there was a wonder of God about him.
Yeah.
And I was thinking with this principle, it really summed it up for me, because it thought, what would happen if he really got a revelation of the love of Jesus? Because he's not there, but what could turn? Because he obviously was passionate about what had happened to him. So it helped me a lot to calm down inside and just keep listening and thinking, who is this man? Who did you create him to be? Mm-hmm. Instead of who's standing right here. Just, yeah.
I think there's another factor in here. I do remember in my time in business, did some work with the United Nations. And we had, I talked to one guy who was talking about how they negotiate. And there's a game that they make them play. There you go. You know, which is the whole thing about, you know, always in any discussion seeking to have a win-win. And if you go for anything less than that, a win-lose, then it's lose-lose, because somehow, some way, the losing party will figure out a way to get you back, and that's it.
Yeah.
So, in the context of what you do in commercial negotiations and all that, and you've got to try to make sure that whatever you strike is something that both sides believe is a win for them. And I think what we have in many situations is this feeling of win-lose. You know, it's sort of, you know, it's this thing is, I must win, you must lose. Or if you win, I lose. And you know, they're sort of trying to seek, therefore, to change the mindset to say that there is a way. if you work hard enough at it, to find win-win. I used to have a customer whose father was he was an Australian and his father was an ambassador, and he said, my father used to spend all of his time building ladders for the other person to climb down, basically, which was always a great phrase. And I just think there's a lot we can, learn from that approach. And the way I was thinking on this one is to say, going into something like this is trying to figure out how do we come out of this with a situation where we both feel we won. And if we can find that, it's hard, it's not easy, obviously, but if we can, then somehow I sort of saw a lot of that in this second principle, I think.
Yeah.
I think another thing for me, with the challenges will be forgiveness. To give and to receive forgiveness, in applying the principle could be challenging. But if we can find a place to forgive and to receive forgiveness, then I think it's kind of another way of applying the principle.
Yeah.
Because you can't have a beloved community without some forgiveness.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it as well is part of the challenge is to help them not demonize you. Often we're thinking, how do we not demonize them? But actually, we have to approach them in such a way that they find it difficult to demonize you.
How do you prevent that?
I think some of it is about the approach you take. Trying to find some common ground initially. So that they don't feel that you're totally on opposite sides.
I read an article recently that was about how white people in the United States talk to each other about race, and how oftentimes white people will, who have had their consciousness raised, will then attack other white people who are still caught in blindness. I think you understand what I'm saying. And the article was arguing that breaks down communication, and I can see how it leads to them demonizing us, so to speak, that someone who still is holding racist ideologies, even unconsciously, if I'm attacking them, they're seeing me as the attacker. And the point that they were making was a different bridge building approach is to talk about race in your own life. Instead of acting like, now that you've figured it out, you're perfect, say, here's what I was raised to believe, and here's how I came to struggle with that. It's more of a testimony approach. And I came to understand that everyone is loved in God's sight, and realize that. And so I think it is a challenging thing to avoid the others demonizing you.
Yeah.
And that, on coming back to the first one, the first principle about courage, I think sometimes it takes courage to be somebody who speaks up differently in your group.
Yeah.
Because then you face a loss of reputation.
Right.
Those kinds of things as well. Coming back to the point, was attacking those groups. Between. You still there? Did you hear that?
I missed it, but Samuel might have gotten it.
No, I think we have a little bit of an unstable internet at the moment, so we're losing little fragments.
Yeah, it's a little unstable today.
Well, what I was saying was the thing you did yesterday about the 2 blocks, the majority, the minority, the wall in between, and you need people in both of those blocks. That really struck me yesterday, and I could see how that worked. And you need courage to speak up in your block.
Right.
So you don't allow your block to demonize you as well. Because then you become kind of in no man's land.
Right, exactly, because you no longer have the love and trust of people in your own group, and you're still, whatever your identity is, that means that you're not that other group. So I think that's a lot of that's the experience of a lot of people who work for change, is not having their own group other than the Center for Peace and Reconciliation will become your group. So,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's where you say we're building the beloved community where we can lick our wounds and heal and develop strength for the next part of the struggle. So it's like, that's why the beloved community, in the way it was used, that term was used in the US Civil Rights Movement, it was referring to the struggle group, like the movement group, as well as the vision. So like, we're building beloved community right here among us, and we have to go that deep with each other so that we can be there for each other, so we can be seen as traitors by everyone else.
Yeah.
Samuel, do you have a comment? And I think it's time for our first break.
So much positive energy going on in the room that I think it's just, my comment is to say, when you look at all of those principles, they so flow into each other that as you think about the beloved community, all of a sudden, it's already making me to begin to think about the next principle.
Yeah.
So maybe I think I'll leave it there so we take a coffee break and then we come back to the next principle.
Samuel needs his coffee. So how long should our break be?
10 minutes?
Yeah, sounds good. Also, hi, Jane. You weren't there last time the camera was on that side of the room. So I noticed when you came in. But
I've been listening very well.
okay, so 10 minutes. We'll see you.
Okay, see you soon.
See you guys.
And Peter, can we do order and talk about food?
Just 2 seconds.
Who is gonna want a meal, and we're gonna order it for 6 o'clock or
Okay.
in that round?
Yes.
Oh, I use voices just please.
Yes. Peter, do you have a suggestion?
I can easily do Chinese, or I can do anything with just eat, but yeah, absolutely. Does Chinese work, or shall I say something else? Chinese, right?
Chinese sounds good to me.
How many people are wanting Chinese? Next question.
I don't know whether you have to ask him, he might,
Okay.
sort it out.
What about you?
I've got salad.
You've got salad.
Very exciting.
Can you do that, Chinese? Yes, please.
How many?
2.
2. 3. Jane was yes.
A little bit.
Ian, would you like Chinese food for dinner? Or not eating at 9, we're going to eat at whatever the long break is.
Yeah.
Whatever.
So how many are we talking about?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the only one we don't know is Mike, so I'll find Mike.
We were reviewing and processing, and then we came on to straight really on to the first group of second discussion.
It's mainly
Reflection. So that's all right. We were leaving you. You're a good teacher.
I don't say a lot, so I hope you're all right if I just sit and listen.
No, well, that's up to them. I will send a message through to them and say Jane doesn't say much. But you can see it on there when I write the message. So I'm wondering how I can. I'm just asked Samuel because he knows it's how I can get the recording. It is recording, it says, but.
Should I text Mike? He's left the building.
He's left the building. Yeah, what chair works for you, Ian?
I'll go get one of those ones from them.
Okay. Right, let's see.
I'm texting Mike.
Realise you've been so successful with in-depth conversations. I didn't realise you'd been so successful with in-depth conversations.
Yeah, we did. It was the first time, the song the week before, I wasn't.
Much better. This is the wise decision.
He was not in a talking mood at all.
How did you meet it? What you found?
Well, then the following week, when we got to talk to him, Michael came, and then he was not there. And then he was there for Jada's. He was in a talking mood. We started out talking some of the guys that were there with him. Yeah, I didn't just come in with Jada, and that was pretty good. Mike took one guy and I took the other. And then just I walked up and he was kind of joking around with some guys. And he wouldn't, you know, approaching everybody like that. I mainly ended up listening because I felt like nearly all these guys, whenever I speak, they go, "Oh, where are you from?" And the moment I say Texas, I get an earful.
I didn't
So far right in Texas, it's scary.
We've always been
This is a
Yeah, my daughter's flying to Canada tomorrow.
just
South Africa next time.
we're out on the street.
She's done a year off. She's one man. She's done language. She's just that boy.
oh, it's
Exam
always
failure.
the case. That sounds pretty normal to me.
Nothing's changed now. We got university from September.
He was very relaxed, but that wasn't his.
February to Open University, which gives a lot of flexibility to maintain a relationship. There's a DTS program actually, issue for works, they do an SBS, get attractive boy around. There's another thing how to my nephew? I was like, because I've got qualifications at my age. She goes, no, do industrial college. Something that was available here. Because it's like degree based.
Yeah.
Okay, you have to work your butt off.
Yeah.
But actually, when you come to the end, you've got a degree.
Yeah.
You didn't. For age 30 in the United States,